Hot stove conversations about baseball, history, football, and current events that may leave you saying there's more to consider. Now, here's your host, Jack Moore.
Welcome to another edition of More to Consider. Again, like and subscribe, please, everybody that listens to this. We do a lot of sports, so we do a lot of politics, pop culture, history, etc. And any of you that have been listening to me these past few months understand that politically I lean very little L libertarian because I think, and again, we're just trying to put definitions on things, so I'm seeking out people to do shows with, my producer, about people that talk about political theory and sort of the very nature of why we come to the conclusions we do. Like, what is the function of government? Why do we believe what we believe? Are we ruled? Are we free people? Should the structure be something that protects our individual rights, or is it something else? Is it here to serve us? Serve us what? Pizza? What are we supposed to be doing with this thing we call this social contract? Is that even in fact real? So I have on this gentleman today, Gordon Phillips. He has a background in finance and investing. He helps people try to navigate through the crazy world of economics and how they can set their families up to do better in life. And he's written a book, Essays on, let me get the whole title here, Reader, Essays on Fallen Freedoms, Cultural Collapse, and the New America. Gordon Phillips, coming out of New England, beautiful part of the world, believe it, where he is. I know that's a great part of the world. Mr. Phillips, sir, how are you today?
I am doing great, Jack. It's great to meet you. It's great to be on.
So I've read a good part of your book, and I kind of opened up with, I'm an old radio guy, so I talked about like off the air before we got started. You mentioned in your book that, try to paraphrase here, is basically there's going to be three types of readers. Ones that are going to be shocked and just scream out, eek, and throw it to the wall because they're scared of it. Some might be enlightened to some degree and say, I'm kind of open-minded to see more. And then there's going to be a third group, which I clearly fall into, that's like, why doesn't everybody else think that? So,
yeah, why?
Yeah, the why. And so what I want to ask you starting off is, why this book? How'd you get started? You're writing about these type of issues as it relates to the culture of America and how it relates to we relate to each other, how we relate to each other. How'd this come about?
Well, and when I was around 40 years old, I got out of the music business. I'd been a professional musician my young life.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend called me on the phone one day and said, did you know the Federal Reserve is not federal? I thought I was looking for that. I was looking for the camera. Like, what is this, a joke?
Yeah.
I got work to do. He says, no. He's all excited. He says, your fax machine on? I says, yeah. I go to the bank, I come back, the roll had run out. I sit down that night and I start reading all these court cases, and it blew my mind.
Yes.
I went right down the rabbit hole. And pretty soon I was involved in what was called the constitutional revival movement of that time, traveling around the country, lecturing all over the place, doing radio shows. And then I was 53 years old and I had my first child when I was 53.
Good for you.
So we unplugged the TV.
Right.
Like I used to joke, there's only one sewer line in our house and it goes out.
That's right.
That's a joke, yeah.
I got you. I like it.
And then we had one kid after another, 3 children, homeschooled them all.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that what I wanted to teach them is what I needed to know.
Right.
So I dug right in. And that's when I got really immersed. And if I may use the term in a secular sense, born again.
Yes.
As an American. Like, what is a real American? What do you need to know to qualify as a citizen? I mean, to operate the levers of government. We're the ones running the government, not them. They work for us. And so I really got into it hot and heavy. And then, of course, and then when I learned, this is a joke, but I like to say that when Morpheus handed Neo the red pill and the blue pill, he palmed the green pill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the money pill. When you take that one, you go down the hole deeper than Alice ever dreamed of going. You go to the bottom of everything. And that's where you have big money, big pharma, big business, big war, big drugs, big everything. And once you understand that, you understand the whole deal. So one more point. I started writing.
Yeah.
I started writing essays to myself. It was like catharsis. I wasn't publishing them.
Mm-hmm.
And then about a year ago, I said, maybe I'll put them in a book. So I spent a whole long time going over again, refining them. You know, when you're your own editor, you always miss your own typos. And then The Risky Reader, which is the name of the book, is what evolved from that journey. And then I said, well, if I've got a book, maybe I'll go on podcasts, see if anybody wants to talk about the book. And then we found each other, and lo and behold, here we are. Yeah.
And I apologize. I read it to shoot. Yeah, I'd cut my screen off. It's The Risky Reader, right? The Risky Reader, Essays on Fallen Freedoms, Cultural Collapse, and the New America. I wanted to clarify that. So, okay, I'm a weirdo. I mean, I know my mind works differently than a lot, but again, I'm always kind of a first principles guy. So I went through, as I mentioned, talking about my dad and some of the things that he taught me as far as approach to the world. I end up on radio with the guy 30 plus years ago, is now one of my best friends, 75, Vietnam veteran, Marine. And he's talking Ayn Rand, and he's talking, like I said, a lot of, she's an objectivist, but little L libertarian things. And I started to really rethink, how did we get to here? How did we get to the places we are as far as our relationship to others? And again, terms like social contract, what does all this mean? So I always kind of think in terms of by what authority? Why I taught criminal justice classes at an open class to students with, have you ever thought about, what do you mean by what authority? They just want to know what the law says, and it's not a question of the mechanics of, if the cop pulls you over at 3 a.m., what authority do they have to do that? What is probable cause? What do all these legal terms mean? And then I would break out the Declaration. And being publicly educated, many of them had never really heard. Honestly, when I'm talking Brother Jefferson and laying out what the function of government is, they're like pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, they don't know.
Yeah, and then when it says, it goes on to say, and when governments fail to meet these ends, it's the duty of the people to alter or abolish. And I'd ask them, who did he write this to? And they're like, George III, yeah, in part to the world, because he's saying we have to give a justification for this break. And this is earth-shattering. And I just did a show today with a guy on the Second Amendment, and he'd written a book, it's great, on how the weapons of the time, and I'm going somewhere with this, the weapons of the time was such an essential tool that in North America, in this new world, these people are beginning to operate in self-rule. They don't have a monarch over them. They're certainly affiliated with England, but it's in that sense that you have a people that have come from the greatest power in the world at the time, now having to live on their own, and they've established such a culture that they're really at odds from what they came from. And then this whole question of they less and less want this idea that they're going to be ruled by, and they are buffered by 3,000 miles of sea. So they have this chance to start over. And I will say this as a Virginia, and then I'll shut up for a moment here. I grew up in Virginia, and I just went to the West Coast, and I hear people, I've never been to D.C., I've never been on the East Coast, and I get it because maybe they didn't have reasons to. But I grew up in the world of Jamestown. It's right down the road from me. I live in the Williamsburg area now. When it comes to Father of the Country, George Washington, when it comes to author of the Declaration of Independence, pretty much Thomas Jefferson, and when it comes to writing the Constitution, pretty much James Madison. So I don't know that there's ever been a greater pocket of political genius in the history of the world than here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, do you know what John Kennedy once said?
Yeah.
He went at a dinner of all of his executive heads. He said, this is the greatest collection of minds to dine in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone.
God bless him. That's absolutely, yeah. So we grow up with, at least I did, and I know you did, or again, you're saying at some point in midlife, you're kind of opening your eyes to maybe some things that you just hadn't considered in some time. But I know this isn't universal. The idea that we can self-rule, that if there is some function of this collective force, it should be, Bastiat, the law, I think nails everything. When he wrote the law in 1848, he's saying the only righteous thing government can do is protect individual rights. Anything else becomes plunder. And of course, that's
it. Oh, that's that. I used to listen to that on audio. I practically memorized that book.
Mm-hmm. And
my kids, that we drilled it into them in homeschooling.
Yeah, I think
government's the great agent that plunders everybody.
Yes.
Yeah. It's people just don't understand that. They just it's. Of course, I make analogies all the time to the Truman Show, the movie, the Truman Show. Because I was living in the Truman Show until I was 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ashamed to say. I mean, I had suspicions my whole life that things weren't right, but I didn't really see the big picture. But then what I realized is everybody has their own back door to the Truman Show. You just have to find it. But what I like to kid and say is outside the Truman Show theater is what I call the Truman Show RV park and campground. And that's where me and you and I and all our best friends are out there with our RVs, and we're giving each other back rubs and playing the guitar and writing poetry and homeschooling each other's kids. But tomorrow morning when your alarm goes off, your job is back in the Truman Show. That's where the dentist is and the ATM and your job. And so you have to be able to get along with people who don't know what you know and whose eyes have not been opened. And you cannot be an elitist. You can't lose your sense of perspective and your sense of humility and modesty. You're not any better than anybody else. Just for the grace of God, you woke up. And then as we were talking before the show, the best you can do is to try to open their eyes, not for your own ego to prove that you're right, to open their eyes to help them see truths that you know will benefit them and improve their lives.
One of the things I just rolled over into on your book for the listeners, he's asking in this essay, Mr. Phillips is asking, why do we create governments to rule over us, then allow them to get out of control? Why do we often end up being governed by the worst among us? And that, brother, wow. I mean, like, you look around sometimes and you see what's coming out of Washington, and you're like, really?
It's like the scene from Star Wars, like the bar scene from Star Wars, looking at the Democrats.
Yeah, sorry. Well, yeah, that would be, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, and to tell you the truth, I know this is a bumper sticker too. You know, what's really I mean, 35 years ago, the argument was 36 versus 39% tax rates. You know, like Republican, Democrat. But I will say, and I think that you'll go along with me on this, I've watched things happen over periods of time. I was actually in the last show, I was telling this gentleman, I pick up on things. I'm not trying to say that I'm above everybody. I'm just saying I pick up on things. And I remember 25, 30 years ago, I kept hearing gender. And I kept thinking, you're referring to sex, male, female. Why do they keep talking like this gradations of masculine and feminine? And then fast forward, you see what happens.
Yeah.
And then you see the talking point over the last 2 decades. It's an attack on our democracy. And I'm like, where the hell do you see democracy in the formation of this country? You know, there was an aspect of democracy. They wanted us to vote for our member of the House. They never intended for us to vote for president. They didn't intend for us to vote for U.S. senators. That was supposed to be taken care of by the state legislatures. 17th Amendment changed that. I get it. And they were moving in that direction. But this idea of almost a direct democracy, they were scared. I mean, read the Federalist Papers. You get exactly what these people thought.
That's why they created Electoral College.
Yeah, we talked about that too. And, you know, I've had all the friends that go, it's a remnant of racism. I said, no. They wanted to make in the Constitution, they wanted to believe that the states were voting for the president. And there was all this battle over the large states, you know, the large state plan, and they came to a compromise. The whole Congress is a compromise. Okay, no matter the size of the state, you get 2 U.S. senators. And then your House of Representatives are going to be based upon population. Okay, makes kind of sense. And then, of course, that is really the background of the undergirding of what's going to happen with the Electoral College. But you see the numbers, you know, for example, 2016, if I'm not mistaken, there is a popular vote. The states then began, I think I looked up in the first election of the 13 now states, 2 had not yet ratified the Constitution. For Washington, only 11 of the states actually sent electors. 6 of the states didn't even let the people vote. I don't think South Carolina allowed people to vote until 1852. So the states began to move in that direction of using the popular vote within the state as the mechanism for selecting the electors. But Article 2 is very clear. It's up to the state legislatures to choose the method of whatever it is. So this idea that's been sort of accepted in common culture, and what scares me is the alphabet news agencies, when they keep saying attack on democracy, it becomes this mantra, it's a bumper sticker. You hear it over and over. People believe this is truly a democracy, and trying to run one particular candidate out of any chance to be president again is in fact preserving democracy. So you can't let that guy be voted for in an effort to preserve democracy, which it's all asinine. And after COVID, I mean, I think that's really a tipping point. We saw where this was going. I was starting to live as you were in 1984, and that really began to scare me because the sort of mind stuff that was being used openly and blatantly became quite frightening. And I don't know if we've rebounded. Do you think we've rebounded at all?
No. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be cynical. I've been a trader for many, many years, done a lot of technical analysis. And trends only end under two conditions.
Mm-hmm.
One, they run out of steam, or two, they're counteracted by a trend of equal or greater force.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
There is no equal or greater force to counteract the current, dare I call it, dystopian downward trend of our culture. It would take the American public to wake up en masse, open their eyes, and demand their liberties. And that's never happened in all of human history. Nothing to do with America. It's just that's human nature. People react at the very last minute. When they finally realize how bad things are, they panic. And by then, it's usually too late, which is unfortunate. I know this sounds a little bit nihilistic or defeatist, and I don't mean to come off that way at all. That's the way it's happened through I'll put it this way. Every government in the history of all recorded history has failed. Every single government. That's quite a track record. And they oppressed their people on the way out the door and robbed the public treasury.
Yeah, that's, I think, where I have moved more and more over time. When I meet this Marine, Vietnam veteran, he's talking Ayn Rand, and I don't know, that's one of those things I know you've seen probably many times, the Ayn Rand 1959 interview with Mike Wallace.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I watch it, and I can show it to a friend, and they're like, man, she's really mean-spirited. Wallace just comes off like an idiot to me, because what she's saying is forced altruism. There always has to be a dependent. I always have some duty to take care of them. And I know one of her great quotes was, can a free man have an unchosen obligation? So he's saying, well, Christ and all the great moral leaders of our time have said, give to your brother, but not through taxation. And you have a duty, an individual duty before your creator. Okay,
Sure,
maybe.
Sure.
So I'm hearing her, and and he just comes back with all of these sort of, again, bumper sticker attacks on her. And I'm hearing her, but most people I hear are like, well, she seems awfully selfish or all this. I said, no, I think what she's basically saying is collectivism always ends in somebody getting rich and you becoming a slave.
It doesn't work on any level. It never has.
Right.
Let me say one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
I want to frame this in a positive note.
Sure.
I really do think there's going to be a total eruption of liberty and prosperity once again. It may be 10 or 15 years from now, but we're going to go through what I think is historically proven to be a very difficult, tumultuous financial and political period. And I don't see any way of turning that around. And again, I'm not trying to be negative. I've got 3 young children. My youngest is 19. My oldest is 26.
Right.
But by the time they're in their 40s, this could be a wonderful place to live again. So I just want to put a exclamation point on that, because I don't want to come off as some kind of a doom and gloomer. That's not me at all. But unfortunately, I'm an irredeemable realist, and so you never get invited back to parties. That's all.
I have seen some. Now, I'm a college baseball coach, and one thing about, I get older and older every year, of course. I'm a year older, but you're always with 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And I see a marked difference. Some of this, I think, is post-COVID, because some of these kids were now more junior high, and they weren't as much traumatized their senior year by the schools shutting down. So they're a little bit distanced from that. But I see, I don't know, 6 months ago, maybe a little bit less, study comes out and says the 21 to 29s are pretty much too far, 22 to 29 are too far gone. They're crazy left. They buy into everything. But there's a backlash now in the 18 to 21s where like, nah, enough of this. We want to go back to being somewhat of a normal society. They want their...
Oh, they're waking up big time.
Yes.
I've got a 19-year-old. All her friends are totally awake. If you just to throw something out there, if you were to mention to them, did we ever go to the moon? Their instant reaction is, no, they made it all up, but we don't care. In other words, they're not even cynical. They completely accept the idea that the government has misled them in almost every area of their lives, and they're just going to move on. It's encouraging. It's refreshing. Yeah, indeed. To your point. Yeah, totally.
Well, and I keep quoting this, and I need to do some research. I'm lazy as hell, but I mean, there's the thing that keeps getting discussed constantly. I guess it was a book or a theory, but it's the 80-year cycles, the spring, summer, winter, fall of societies. And so we're 80 years removed from World War II. So that created that tough generation that created a bunch of soft kids and then became hippies in the 60s and, took over the college campuses. And now, their kids have led to where we are kind of today. And now these kids are going to have to react. And 80 years prior, it was the American Civil War. And 80 years prior, it was the American Revolution. So in these 80-year cycles, hard men make better times and the better times make soft kids and everything. So I think we are. And what we're seeing, the reaction of these 18-year-olds is they're becoming that group that's going to be the World War II generation, only of this generation.
No, I hear you. I totally agree.
Getting back, I want to go ahead and read some of this because I think it's awesome. In Mr. Phillips' book, in these essays, he said, type 1, I want to get into this. If you attended public school, watch a lot of television, enjoy the Super Bowl commercials and halftime shows, feel passionate about your politics, got yourself vaxxed and then boosted, probably many times, and performed all the usual tricks of the modern world, what I'm about to write may sound completely impossible, totally over the top, highly exaggerated, and thoroughly insane. To you, I say, thank you for giving this book a shot, pun intended, and may your remaining experience in life conform to your created reality. No hard feelings. Type 2, if you find yourself waking up from your cultural slumbers with one half your brain already out of the matrix, you may find this book thoughtfully disturbing and quite possibly true, if perhaps still needing to attribute to your author a hint of conspiracy theorizing just to maintain some existential stability. To say, I say thank you, and please do hang in there. So this type 3, minority of readers, and let me emphasize a small minority, will find yourselves nodding and smiling in approval at never having seen the matters I write about described quite so realistically before. You may even do a little happy dance to discover that you are truly and tragically not alone in the universe as you sit there at Starbucks contemplating which Alan Watts video to watch next. All right. Now, and again, I thought
you're not supposed to laugh at your own writing. I hope it didn't sound conceited.
No, not at all. It's beautiful. It's actually beautiful. And again, I don't want this to come off as, but when you find kindred spirits, before we talked a little bit before we were going to do the show, man, I'm going through this. And I know you and I would probably say, but again, you had an awakening. I've certainly gone through that. So when we're on the other side, we can sometimes look back and go, man, I'm digging everything you're saying. I get it. And people do come to that. I had a friend when I was teaching at a community college here a few years ago, as we went through a lot of the things related to COVID and just the world going crazy. And at every turn, I'm like, this is going to happen next. And then something happened. And she kept saying, how are you seeing all this? I'm like, how the hell do you not see it coming?
I've been doing that for my whole adult life. It drives my kids crazy.
And I was like, well, if you kind of see certain signs of something, you can kind of see what's coming next. And I think it's human nature, and I don't think it's anything necessarily nefarious. You don't want to think the world is bad or that there's, really bad actors working, at the crossroads, working against us. But there's enough history. And that's interesting that you say about like 18-year-olds and the moon landing, because I struggle with a lot, because I'm like, did they pull one over on me here when I was 7 years old?
We'll have to talk off show.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's one of those.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, and this always becomes part of the subject matter of every show I do. I did my master's thesis on the Kennedy assassination, and I'm absolutely convinced Oswald did it. But I think he did it for the government, or I think he was involved with the government. But I do think what's come out through the years, or what hasn't come out, always seems to be something related to his connection or the knowledge. Well, I mean, in the last documents that came out, they find that James Jesus Angleton, which was the subject of the movie The Good Shepherd with Matt Damon, was the mole hunter within the CIA. They were intercepting his mail in 1959. And he's not the only military personnel type that's all of a sudden wants to go to the Soviet Union and denounce his citizenship. So there's a program going on. So when that guy pops up in Dallas and you see the history, kind of interesting. The war escalates in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin is absolutely a lie, the resolution which leads to the escalation of the war. So there's plenty of, these things. There's plenty of things to make us really question. But I guess what always gets me is it happens right out in the open.
It always happens in the open. I got a book for you to read. You want to take a note? Lee and Me. Leeand, me. Lee and Me. By Judith Baker. Right on Amazon.
Are we talking?
How I learned to know, love, and lose Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with her. Yes.
Written by his lover, escaped America for her life.
Yeah.
Wrote the book in her city.
Yeah. I am quite familiar with her. And yeah, those things I think fascinate me, sort of what she said he truly was. And well, and you have the videos of Marguerite Oswald, the mom, within weeks, and like, my son was a government agent from the day he entered the Marine Corps. And, everybody laughed her off as some crazy. And that's one of those subjects kind of near and dear to my heart because I've researched it so much. But that is happening. That you have a mother on there saying that my son that joined the Marine Corps went up to the Soviet Union and returned without really any problems. As a matter of fact, he got a loan from the United States government to come back.
Well, we'll have to talk.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot there, but okay. So let's get back to your book and where you're going with this. I guess in doing what you do and writing these essays, you point out a lot of things that are historical, last 30, 40 years, and how these things illustrate certain things to probably raise an eyebrow and bring into question. Is that the greatest mechanism, because you're writing essays, is that the greatest mechanism to eye open? So you're not teaching so much the philosophy, you're just saying in the essays, hey folks, take a look at this. Is that more of it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a trip through reality. None of us have a corner on the truth. When I taught my kids when they were little, I said, look, we put a 300-watt light bulb in one corner of a pitch black room. The room will be blindingly bright with dark shadows everywhere. Well, now we switch to 475-watt light bulbs, one in each corner. Or maybe we go, you get the idea. Pretty soon there's no place for the darkness to hide. And that takes about 10 years on any subject. I don't care if you want to become a classical violinist or you want to understand the Kennedy assassination. You have to invest the time. And even once you do, it's still your version of the truth. If you're not a first-person witness to history, everything you read is secondhand. And everybody who writes a book, including me, has a natural built-in bias towards how you frame reality. So you've got to constantly be a skeptic, keep an open mind, be a skeptic, and evaluate the facts through the filter of your own personal experience. But after a while, I've got 5,000 books in my library and I've read every one of them. I'm not saying that to brag or complain. That's just what I've been doing for the last 40 years. And everything you'd want to know is in a book. But most people don't even know the books exist, and of course, they don't read them, and our modern culture is not as literate as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to your question, I wrote this book mostly it was a cathartic exercise. I wrote it for my kids. I just wanted to get out everything that I had come to learn and understand over the last 40 years and frame it in a way that kind of poked the reader in the chest in a friendly way, but to challenge what you really believe that you know about life, reality, the relationship with government, what liberty is, what freedom is, what taxation is. And then I, got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, the kids call it snark, right? It's snarky, a little bit of fun. You got to have a little fun in there. But that's why I wrote the book. So,
what's been the reaction?
Very positive. It's been really good. Thankfully, knock on wood.
I mean, do you ever have people reach out to you and hey, brother, I read your book, or maybe group 1, group 2 from your identification of the 3 groups? Do you ever get any ones that say, I was a 1 and man, this woke me up? Or
no, because one won't buy the book.
Okay, so you're dealing with some 2s, hopefully.
They won't read it. They won't buy it. They throw it in the trash if you mail it to them. The most you can hope for is have some 2s wake up.
All right, let me ask you this. Here's another theory. It was so many themes come up in so many shows, and some of them you're related to. I'm, like I said, heavily into baseball, and I see it in athletics a lot. I do see it. Well, I see it in people peripheral to athletics. I think that when we're in the playground, some kids better looking, stronger, faster. We all know that. We grow up with that. And some of them, the best days they're ever going to have, it pretty much craps out in the 10th grade. Some people are late bloomers. But people have different talents. And I think by the nature of how we're made, so much of the problem with mankind is they're fairness freaks. They're at odds with reality. They're at odds with the distribution of talent, whatever. Some other force to come in and level the playing field. I think Bastiat also said something like, one of the most evil of intentions that mankind has is to want to live off the labor of others.
Well, that's plunder, sure.
Yeah, right. That's part. Well, see, the plunder thing too, though, with the government types, and this is shooting fish in the barrel, but the other day I'm like, why are people going to Congress making $176,000 a year in the House and they're leaving worth $15 million after 4 terms? How can that possibly be happening?
Well, here in New Hampshire, I think they get paid $100 a year to serve in the House legislature.
Right, at the state level, right.
Which is how the Congress should be.
Well, I think that would have been the framers' intent, but then you get the problem of they're going to say, well, then only the rich elites are ever going to go there. And I don't know that cleans up some aspect of it. You might get some rich elites that would go to Washington because they can afford to.
Let me point something out.
Yeah.
If you want to become a naturalized citizen of the United States,
mm-hmm.
you have to take an exam that's given out by the State Department.
Right.
Most Americans couldn't pass it.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Okay. So when we get down to the issue of who, there are no checks and balances in place as to who gets to run for political office in the first place. You can have never read the Constitution, never read any of the founding documents, anything you're talking about, be dumb as a stump, have a great haircut, a pretty wife, a handsome husband. You work your way up through the political machinery, you get into positions of power, and you get to write words on paper we call laws that tell everyone else what they have to do. That's the system that we have. And so it's garbage in, garbage out. When you have a deteriorated culture that's lost its moral and ethical compass, you get the people that you get who then go to government and oppress you. And, they don't serve you, they serve themselves. And that's when the corruption, it's the very nature of government to be corrupt. It has been throughout human history. And the only way that you can counteract that is to field the most principled, ethical people who are statesmen and women, and not politicians, which, of course, as we know, is the world's second oldest profession. So I have a lot of fun with this subject in the book, and it's a real eye-opener for people who've never thought this way before.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a culture that has whatever collective expectation of morality that we have. On a scale of 1 to 10, it could be like very moral, if we can imagine that, towards a 10 or towards a 1. And the people that represent us are probably going to be a reflection of where we are on the scale.
Sure, yeah.
And that's exactly where we are. So, and was it Davy Crockett? I always get this straight. Was it Davy Crockett that was the member of the House when the guy wrote him the letters? It's not your money.
The sockdologer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in that sense, they were going to, they had a disaster in D.C., like some houses.
Well, no, they wanted to, Congress was going to vote a pension for a woman who was the widow of a military person who died somehow. I don't remember that detail.
Right. That's right.
And Crockett was out re-campaigning for office, and this old farmer confronted him across the fence and just chewed him down and said, I'm not going to vote for you. You have no right to vote the people's money and put it in the pocket of a private individual.
Right.
And Crockett said he called it a sockdologer, an old expression for getting basically a roundhouse across the chin. And he went back to Washington and repented and told the story, and kind of changed his whole perspective on government, that one encounter. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking it was something in Congress, too, about some houses burned down in D.C. and being the fact it was a federal city and everything. There was some question about Congress throwing some money towards it. And maybe this was a different one than from the Davy Crockett, but I do know with the Crockett, it was like, it's not your money. But I remember there was an argument in the House where it was said, people throughout the country have hard times. It doesn't mean it's a function of Congress. And if you really feel that way, stroke checks. Like everybody in Congress here can get together and we can write enough checks among us as a House, as a body, to write a check for that. If we want to do it, fine. If you want to raise money, or they got GoFundMe now, they didn't have it then. But that concept, what are we talking about? Early to mid 19th century. So it's a little bit different view of things. It's a different time, certainly. And of course, that concerns me too, and is where I was starting off at the very beginning of the show. People have a worldview. Everybody, catch can by default, whatever. You have a view of what you think something has a duty to do, what it owes you,
Sure.
et cetera. And clearly, when you hear people say, I'm going to vote for my interests, I'm going to vote for the politician that's promising to do the most for me, and you say to yourself, is that really what this is supposed to be about? But if that's
No,
sort of
it's not remotely what it's supposed to be about.
no, but I mean, if you did a poll on the street, what percent of people would say that? 90?
Most people don't even know what government is.
Right.
They have no idea what the concept of government is. I mean, I think you'd agree with your history. The basic concept of government is the collective expression of the individual right of self-defense.
Exactly. Well, that's what Bastiat said. I'm with him.
Exactly. You only form a government to protect you from threats both external and internal. And the most pernicious, dangerous ones are always internal. You let the worms in and they rot the apples out from the inside. The barbarians are inside the gates.
Right.
You know, that started with the presidency of John Adams with the Alien and Sedition Act. It actually started earlier than that, when Alexander Hamilton talked Washington into passing an excise tax on liquor.
Right.
And they had the Whiskey Rebellion, and
yes.
Hamilton went out with a whole bunch of troops to put it down, to show everybody there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new boss in town. The federal government's here. Woohoo! Everybody wake up. And it was just a show of force. It was completely unnecessary.
And that took all of what, 6 years?
Yeah.
Was it 5 years?
And then you get to Lincoln. People say, well, he tried to save the Union. No, he didn't. The South seceded. They didn't try to. They left. They sent formal notice to Congress. They raised their own legislature, they raised their own army, they printed their own money. They were recognized by foreign nations. And then Lincoln invaded them, like we invaded Iraq. He could have turned north and invaded Canada. So real history is nothing like what we were taught in school.
Yeah, I actually...
Nothing. It's really... And then when you understand that, especially when you're homeschooling.
Yeah.
Which is why the government wasn't thrilled. I was there at the beginning of the homeschooling movement, when parents were being arrested for school because their children weren't in school during school hours, and they were charged with aiding and abetting truancy.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the 80s.
Yeah,
because the government was terrified that these kids are going to sit at the kitchen table with their mom and some real history books. Like, if you want to learn about the Civil War, why don't you read a book that was written in 1880 that told the absolute truth, fresh in the minds of everybody? By the time you get to the Encyclopedia Britannica, by the time you get to the 90s, it's already been sterilized and sanitized. So anyway, I don't want to talk too much.
No. I love what you. Well, I've thought about it too. I was teaching a history class a few years ago, and we kind of get in this, as a college level history class, we got in this kind of general discussion, and I'm like, I'm not a wordsmith. I mean, I don't get to create the language, but I think there's probably varying definitions of civil war. But I said, I think if you look at it historically, it's generally two warring factions for control of a particular country.
Oh, 100%.
That was
the Southerners call it
the War against Southern Independence.
Well, they call it the War of Northern Aggression.
That too, yes.
Or Lincoln's War.
Yes.
And if you go to the state song of Maryland, the second or third stanza is the despot's heel is upon thy shore. Maryland, oh Maryland, the streets flecked of Baltimore, flecked with gore. That's real. That's the truth right there.
Yeah, and I'm just simply addressing that, the bombardment at Fort Sumter, they have a fort off the shore there of Charleston, and their view is that's ours now because we're South Carolina, and of course, federal troops come in or they fire on the Federals that are still there, and the war begins, and that's looked at as an act of Southern aggression, etc. But like you say, once they put the word out that we have now seceded, we are a different nation, and like you said, they're being recognized by other nations in the world, it does appear, well, I've even heard too that Great Britain, that, early in the war, clearly they were somewhat siding with the South because of the cotton trade and everything else, but that in some of the editorials of the time in London, they were saying, I'm right, what was this about a revolution? Because remember, you guys, it was called a revolution. Isn't the South doing the same thing? They're doing the same thing to the federal government in D.C. They're saying, we break. Why are you calling this an insurrection, or why are you calling this a civil war when isn't it just a war for independence?
Well, you can disagree. You can argue the slavery issue up and down because
Sure.
of the invention of the cotton gin. It was extremely expensive to own and maintain human beings. And within another 20, 30, 40 years, by 1900, slavery would have ended automatically.
It would have died a natural death.
It would have died a natural death. The war of Southern independence was 100% a self-determination of states' rights. You can argue up and down whether you agree with the basis for why they wanted to leave. But under the 10th Amendment, the states always reserved every right to themselves that wasn't 100% outlined in the Constitution.
What about the Alexander Stephens quote, which is always, of course, the top quote to bring out, that's the vice president of the Confederacy saying, no, this is about slavery. This is absolutely. What about that quote?
Well, that's his opinion. There were a lot of people who felt that way. There were many Northerners who did not want, they were perfectly happy with the situation. They didn't want millions of newly freed slaves coming north and taking their jobs dirt cheap. There were the whole situation is so complex and so textured. And you realize, I've got a whole bookshelf just on that era.
Well, and by the time McClellan runs in 64 with the Copperheads, he's basically running on the platform, let the South go, correct?
Yeah.
Wars become unpopular.
Yeah. The South had absolutely, the states. So here's the thing. I've had so many arguments with people over this, and it's really gets kind of fun.
Right.
If you could go back to the Philadelphia Convention where the Constitution was drafted in a time machine and tap them all on the shoulder and say, listen, once you sign and ratify this document, it's like a lobster trap. You get in, but you can't get out. You states, now colonies, soon to be states, you will never, ever be able to leave this federal compact. Think about that for a second. Would any one of them ever have ratified? Not on your life. That's my opinion anyway.
No, right? I mean, well, and wasn't it New Hampshire? What state was it in 20?
New Hampshire declined twice until there was a Bill of Rights.
Right. It wasn't. What was it in 1828? There was the talk of a secession in the Northeast. Wasn't that?
Always have. There've been secession movements ever since day one.
Right.
But the whole point is, the states created the federal compact. It's a voluntary association. They have every right to withdraw from it anytime they like. It's not a life sentence. It's not handcuffs. It's not a lobster trap. It was an agreement among educated people. It's still true today. The problem is they're not going to let you do it because there'll be armed forces deployed. But I wrote a book I wrote a separate book called Why New Hampshire Needs Its Own Money, and I'm trying to get it circulated in the New Hampshire State Legislature, but nobody's taking it seriously. But I think we're going to see tremendous resurgence of secessionary movements in the next 10 years. And I think it's naive and very ill-considered because it will be opposed with force. So just imagine if any given state, let's just say New Hampshire, issues its own money, and it doesn't have to be backed by anything. And that's another whole conversation behind that. They can put a picture of Daniel Webster on it, and it's only lawful tender within the state of New Hampshire. And it could trade at a 1 or 2% discount to the Federal Reserve note, like an inverse sales tax. So you have the Free State Project in New Hampshire,
right,
has been trying for years to get libertarian thinking families to move into the state so the legislature can slowly reverse all these usurpations. And they've got phone banks where they're dialing people and welcome wagons. They're helping them move into New Hampshire. You couldn't beat them off with a stick from what I was proposing. You could completely, totally insulate your state economically from the predations of politicians and bankers and maintain a state economy where there was zero inflation, zero deflation, a totally stable economy. So no matter what happens on the outside, you're not going to be affected by it. So you're not trying to secede or do anything political that looks revolutionary or radical or is going to invite armed aggression. You're just simply disappearing in plain view using powers you absolutely already have. And so it's gone exactly nowhere so far. So I think maybe it's just a little too out there. But the few people who read it say, well, we need a form of government of money that's backed by gold or silver. It's got to be backed by Bitcoin. It's got to be whatever. And that's also not true. That's another whole conversation. We can have some time. But
The only other question I would have is, once ratified, New Hampshire's in, without a move to secede under Article 1, Section 8, where it is the government will coin the money, which of course is not exactly done in the same manner anymore, but would that be any type of violation of the federal Constitution, minus being out from under the federal Constitution to float their own currency within the state?
the way I see it, no. I guess the court would have to eventually rule on
Right.
that. But if the state, for example, you can create any kind of weapon in your own basement machine shop that you want in any state,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it never crosses state lines. It never comes under federal jurisdiction. The problem in the real world is if it were stolen and then someone else committed a crime in another state, it would all come back to you. So there's real and then there's practical considerations.
Right.
But for New Hampshire to create an environment where they created an alternate form of circulating currency for the use of state residents, citizens only, I don't see that violating Article 1, Section 10.
Let's see. I just wanted to see really to coin Clause 5, Article 1, Section 8, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So, yeah. As it comes to counterfeiting, I would say the legal definition would be to create such that you're trying to pass it off as something that the federal government has the strict jurisdiction to create. But that thing of creating something within the state bound, that's an interesting point. I mean, just because it says to coin the money and regulate the value and all that, it doesn't seem to just on its face with that language exclude a state from doing so. But, I don't know.
There are two specific areas where the federal government has jurisdiction within the states. One is postal roads and the other is interstate commerce. And that's it.
And interstate commerce has been so bastardized. Yeah.
And it's like a jigsaw puzzle that the pieces fit into each other. There is no overlap in federal and state jurisdiction. There's a clean demarcation.
Right. No, I totally agree with you there.
It's been totally dissolved by all the sophistry in the courts. But there's lots of things you can do if you keep it in your sneakers inside state boundaries. So then my thought was, well, why not create an ecosystem, an economic ecosystem within the state to benefit state residents that basically pushes away all the. I mean, we're going to see inflation like I don't think the public is ready for, and it's going to take everybody down with it.
Yeah,
if you use their money, if you're going to be using their money, say, well, many states now are moving towards making gold and silver tender, and then you get into the whole crypto thing, and with the coming stable coins, we could have a whole long conversation about that. But the only reason I brought it up was to try to create the idea that the states and the people of the states have power to exert rights in a practical and creative way that doesn't stick your head up to get knocked down like whack-a-mole because you've just decided that you're going to physically leave the territory. Uncle Sam's not going to allow that. Not without a nasty, nasty fight. And then it's 1860 all over again.
Yeah, and so back to my friend that I did radio with, the Vietnam vet, he was big on antique shops. He would go out and do, with the device to go pick up, he'd find old Civil War medals or find buttons and things like that with the mining equipment, whatever. So he was always into history. And one day I came in the station 25, 30 years ago. He goes, you'll never guess what I picked up this weekend. And I've looked it up since. I've kind of looked at the background. Commentaries on the Constitution that was written as like a high school primer by Joseph Story.
Oh, absolutely.
And he said, I get into it. And he goes, guess what, Jack? He talked about the Commerce Clause. And I said, what did Story, appointed by Madison, pretty close to Madison, say about the meaning? And he goes, it simply meant they wanted to regulate commerce and not have border disputes. There wouldn't be wars over what a pound of cotton or a pound of tobacco meant in North Carolina versus Virginia.
That was the problem under the Articles of Confederation. The states could charge tolls just to cross from one colony into the other. People would skirt an entire colony just to avoid paying the toll.
Right. And where it goes crazy, when I was in law school, have a friend of mine that goes to a particular city in the Commonwealth of Virginia as an intern at one of the federal district's prosecutor's office, U.S. District Attorney's office. And she's looking through a file because she's doing kind of the incoming stuff as an intern. And she sees a robbery of a Pizza Hut. I'll tell you, it was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's a armed robbery of a Pizza Hut restaurant. And she looks to a guy and she goes, how the hell is that here? And he goes, well, it's the Johnson Act or something. He gives some name. And he said, the way we see it, the moment the guy goes in with firearm and stops the movement of pizza, the cheese comes from Wisconsin, the pepperonis come from wherever, and he starts naming all these states. So they see it as a disruption of interstate commerce and makes it a federal crime. So with the old saying about the general police power being only a state power, each individual state's not a federal power, the whole sort of common law armed robbery would not be a federal crime. And then the guy turns to her and said, well, don't worry about it. We're going to let Virginia Beach handle it. But if we wanted to go after it, we could. But that's that view of interstate commerce that we can say some of the items that are going to end up in the pizza came across state lines. Therefore, that crime, which occurred totally within the boundaries of a city, not in just a state, but just within the city of Virginia Beach. I don't think there was some kind of conspiracy, from Wisconsin that came down to create this, the circumstances of this armed robbery. But this is where they go. And that's, of course, is one example. So we have this sort of top-down view that most people have. Well, even, again, I remember I've watched millions of hours of video, and it's really fascinating. After the Kennedy assassination, on the next morning, Hugh Downs is on with one of the gentlemen that used to be on NBC and Barbara Walters, 1963, next morning. And Hugh Downs turns to this guy and he goes, realize all they're talking about is charging Oswald with a murder in Texas. And he goes, yes. It is not a federal crime. Now, Lincoln was shot in D.C., Garfield was shot in D.C., and McKinley's assassin was executed in New York because he shot him in Buffalo. But nobody had really thought about the fact, or it's now televised, it's the coverage, and they're bringing up the fact that it's shocking to people that in 1963, it is not a federal crime to shoot the presidents on the streets of a city within a particular state. 2 years later, Congress gets together, and they use the Interstate Commerce Clause somehow is the way to get that in. And I did a show with the guy the other day as a lawyer. He goes, I don't care. If they want to make it a federal crime, that's fine. And I'm like, okay, there may be some other mechanism to get there. But it was interesting that it was still considered a common law crime of murder. It was common.
Let me say this. Your dad was a sheriff.
Yes, sir.
Who was the highest law enforcement officer on the soil, period, the end?
Well, historically in Virginia, the sheriff carried a lot of weight.
The sheriff.
It was a big deal. Sheriff. Yeah, it goes all the way back to the origination of the colonies.
Yeah, the sheriff of Dallas County could have taken whoever they thought were the perpetrators into custody, and it was 100% a state affair because the murder occurred on state soil. Period. The end.
Right.
They didn't do that under pressure, but that has nothing to do with original principles or what's actually written down.
Right.
That's the way it goes. That's how things change. It's just things soften. People make specious arguments. You got sophistry, and if you just, I once read every single Supreme Court decision from the administration of Washington through Clinton, and I just got sickened by it. It's like reading Alice in Wonderland. You can morph anything into anything else you want over time, like a magician, by the language that you use. And you just have to go back to original principles and say, if we had a time machine and we had, all of these framers in one room, would they agree that this was the intent of the Interstate Commerce Clause? Fortunately, we do have Madison's notes on the Federal Convention. So when it came to, we were talking about Article 1, Section 10 earlier, when it came to the idea of putting 3 words in the Constitution, to emit bills, which in their day meant paper money circulating as debt. And they voted on it, and they voted it down, and I forget which colony it was, said it would be as bad as the mark of the beast in Revelation, quote unquote, to include those 3 words in the Constitution. So they were very, very clear on what the intent of the legislation was, and the intent of the law is the force of the law. So again, over the whole secession issue, And I haven't found one person yet who can refute this argument. And I'm not trying to be belligerent. I'm just putting it out there on the table so we can look at. If they were told you will never be able to leave this compact once you sign your name and dot your I. Whoa, we're not doing that. Any rational person would have done that. That's the last thing they wanted. They were terrified of having a new monarch. The whole thing of getting it ratified in the first place was to sell it to the people. Once we get in, they can become a total tyrant, and we can't leave. That's not going to fly.
Well, I guess the other thing that we can't, 250 years removed from the revolution, we can't really, I mean, I know what I read, and I know what I've read in some of the accounts of the people that were in that time, but I would believe that they did not see themselves, even after the ratification of the Constitution, they didn't really see themselves as Americans. They saw them members of the particular states, the colonies they came from. I think they thought of themselves.
You're absolutely right.
And actually, in the show I did earlier today, something came up about Robert E. Lee. And when I was doing a show years ago, and with all the move to destroy the monuments in Richmond, Virginia the other year, and taking them out of the title of Washington Lee University, you know, I was doing a show recently. I said, I've read a lot of history about how Lee was really considered one of the great reconcilers of the whole conflict. And then by 1868, people were pushing him to potentially be a vice presidential nominee. And he goes to Washington University in Lexington, Virginia, and they end up naming the school Washington and Lee. And of course, he and Washington were both born in the same county in Virginia, Westmoreland County. But Lee was more of his father pretty much lost the farm, Stratford Hall, where he was born. They were pretty destitute, and he marries into wealth because it's what Mary Washington's, she was a Custis, was the same relation, I think, with George Washington's wife. So that Arlington house where the cemetery is now was more what he married into. But we're on a show one day with my friend, the Marine, who is a third-generation Italian-American, so his people weren't here, you know, because my people came over the turn of the 20th century, but I'm fascinated by Lee and the history of the Civil War. And he's, you know, in that sense, he's kind of removed from having any particular view from where he grew up. He grew up in New Jersey, but, you know, he said, I find Lee a fascinating figure. And we're on the show one day. Guy calls in. He said he should have been hanged for treason. So we get into that whole discussion. And I don't know this to be true, and I haven't done the research, but a guy called in and made a really interesting point. He said that at the time that Lee went through the United States Military Academy at West Point, they took an oath to their state when they took their oath. They didn't take an oath to the federal government. So it was a school for officers, no doubt, the United States Military Academy. But when he went through it, in his mind, he had an allegiance to Virginia. And in turning down Lincoln, my understanding was more of, I go with whatever way Virginia goes. So when Virginia seceded, I'm not sure, but I think last of all the states that seceded, South Carolina was first. Virginia sort of held back for a while before they made the final move to secede. He became the command in April 23rd, 1861. There was a statue in the Virginia Capitol. There's the House and Senate, there's like the House and Senate this way, and then they built a new one across. So the new one is across from the House and Senate, went to each end from where it was originally. So in the old Senate chambers, they had a statue of where Lee stood when he accepted command of the Army of Northern Virginia. Well, they removed that during 2020. So I think he's kind of a complex figure. I know he made some quotes about the ills of slavery and whatever, you know, that he wasn't exactly a pro-slavery guy. But I think my point is, I think he's a man of the times, that his first allegiance was to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I know you've heard this story.
Sure.
There was a prominent Union general in the war that was a West Pointer who was from the South. And he crossed over the line because he was against slavery. And they said, the account I read said that none of the Union officers trusted him. And they didn't trust him, not because he was from the South, but that he left the South to come fight with them.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm saying that it was so ingrained in the culture then that you stayed with the people that you grew up with. The fact that he fought for the other cause and crossed the line into serving with the Union Army, they thought made him suspect.
Yeah, that's human nature.
Right. But again, so Grant, who looked up to Lee, you think when the war ended, he looked at him as being less than an honorable man because he fought with Virginia? No, I think he would have expected that, right? I mean, it just would have been the expectation. And it didn't remove the fact that they fought the Mexican War together, and he looked up to, I mean, everybody thought Lee was a phenomenal soldier. And I know people, yeah.
There's a book called Leadership Secrets of Robert E. Lee. I gave a signed copy to each of my kids when they were 12 years old. Yep,
Yeah.
100%. I'll tell you,
Eisenhower,
as an aside completely, just as a personal aside, is another great book to read. It's called Guns of the South.
mm-hmm.
It's a sci-fi novel, historically accurate sci-fi novel by Harry Turtledove, where some strangers from the future go back to the South in 1860 and they give Robert E. Lee an unlimited supply of AK-47s. And the whole course of the war changes. The South wins. Lincoln comes out and is surrounded by Southern troops and surrenders. It's a great, great book. If you enjoy some part-time pleasure reading with a lot of really deep historical insights, you'll enjoy it.
And so how do things play forward as far as the slavery issue?
They don't get into it
They don't get.
It doesn't get that heavily into it.
Right.
But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there, lighten things up for a second.
Sure. Yeah, but of course that begs another question. They're like, all right, so we're about an hour in. I just want to go a few more minutes and let you go here today. So right now, I don't think I've ever seen as much craziness. So I just want your kind of view on this. Everything I see, and of course the media is controlled by whatever agencies it's controlled by, but it appears somewhat objectively the Democrat Party as a political organization, as a political party, has got its lowest approval rating ever. Trump has clearly gone down quite a bit from the honeymoon period in the early part of this year. Republican Party as a whole, I haven't really seen a lot of polling. I know Trump's been up and down in certain things, but the Democrats seem to be in an area that doesn't seem to be recoverable. So it looks to me like there is a chance for like total party realignment. Do you ever think, like going into 2028, do you think some major personality, third party type could potentially step in and muddy the waters?
Well, let me throw a grenade in your lap.
Right. Sure.
History will prove, they say you make a fool of yourself by making predictions. Number one, it's very possible the Democratic Party will cease to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, if the current trajectory of our culture, and we talked about this earlier, the trend, doesn't reverse and it continues to accelerate, we may not have an election in 2028. And you heard it here first. I personally think things are going to become much more chaotic than most people are prepared for. And not because I'm inherently, I'm a happy guy. I'm an optimistic guy. I love throwing babies in the air as much as the next guy does, But so when people start talking about politics and Trump and the Republicans and the powers that be that rigged the election in 2020 have learned from their mistakes. I can guarantee you that.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've got coming in 2028 could be a complete political food fight. And if the progressives, communists, pinkos, collectivists, whatever you want to call them, get back into the Oval Office after the wrongs that they perceive have been done to them and are being doing to them now, you're looking at a situation not dissimilar to what the Soviet Union went through in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty heavy bunch of stuff to say. Nobody knows if this is going to come to true. I don't have a crystal ball. But if you stand back far enough as an observer and remove yourself emotionally from the current times, I'll just add this point. We're going to be a footnote in the history books of 500 years from now. It'll be obvious what happens. The truth always comes out in the long run. The challenge is to understand the history you're living through while you're living through it, as unbiased and objectively as you possibly can be. And just being guided by what has happened to governments who put themselves in similar situations to what we're in right now, the trajectory has always been the same. And so my point is the only way that will be altered is either for it to run out of steam, which is not going to happen, or for it to be resisted by an enlightened, informed electorate that rises up to assert their rights. And that has also never happened. Not far enough in advance to actually change what appears to be an inevitable outcome. So to me, all this talk about gerrymandering and I don't even think like that anymore. I mean, it's just the politics is just the Super Bowl. It is what it is. People are going to vote for the guy with the prettiest wife, or the gal with the most handsome husband, or the one who. I mean, we just elected a billionaire. You know, I mean, like, you know, if you were to put Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and Thomas Jefferson into the same room, just imagine them trying to even communicate with each other or agree on anything. It would just be bizarre. We've come so far. And just to try to put things back in perspective. So again, I'm not trying to be pessimistic or negative. It's just I think what we need to do to give you a solution, we need to stop thinking at the federal macro level and start getting serious about protecting ourselves and our families. We need the power that we have, that we can exert, is to be strong inside ourselves, to be as well educated and prepared as we can be, and then to reach out to the people closest to us, our tribe, family, extended family, fellow churchgoers, neighbors, whatever it may be, and help everyone start to become resilient, psychologically resilient, emotionally resilient, financially resilient, situationally resilient, and be prepared for what could be some very difficult times ahead. Because there's nothing I can do, speaking for Gordon, as a human being, to change the course of history, especially at the federal level. But I have all the power in the world to change me. And then maybe I can help influence people around me to help make some good decisions for the future. So I want to say that because I think that leaves a ray of hope in people's bosom. And it also plays back into what I said earlier, that I think we're going to have a real renaissance of liberty within the next generation.
Right.
But first we have to get from here to there. And it ain't going to be easy. So that's my speech.
And I do appreciate that. And when I think about politics at the national level, I'm never hoping or thinking in terms of hoping for some answer and all that. I want as much insulation from the craziness as possible. Like if the government does less or gets mired, every time they shut the government down, or you get a lot of gridlock because the parties are locked up in some kind of congressional split. I mean, that's when we tend to have our best times, it appears. It's like when one party's not in power, it seems like. I can't remember that 94, Clinton goes in, people think he goes a little bit too far to the left. No fan of Gingrich and the whole Republican Party, but when they get that contract with America and the Republicans gain control, it kind of makes Clinton, it sort of tames Clinton at some level. And maybe it's all the mirage, but it seemed like the 90s were pretty good, there for a while. It seemed like things, at least economically, got a little bit more stabilized, but I don't know. I mean,
Well, I have a theory that our presidents are not elected, they're selected.
Sure. Yeah.
Once you understand that, the world is being operated at a level far above visible elected politics.
Well, it'd have to be, yeah.
Yeah, and that starts, now you start to sound like a kook, but history just proves it's true. It's never changed through the hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, what we've seen in the last decade, and that's the last thing. We'll end on this. And again, I'm not. Well, yes, I am. It's not like I'm asking for a prediction. I just want to simply see what you think. I know so much of what I grew up believing maybe is clearly fairy tales. It's not what I thought it was, and certainly, as history has played out, we're all in the dark to some degree about what really happens. But I voted for Reagan in 1980, and I believe I voted in 84. I'm not even sure if I did, but I didn't vote ever again. And in 2016, I was just sort of curious. I was like, can a person from the outside like Trump actually run the office? Is it just too big? Is it too much? And that kind of thing. And when they started saying Russia collusion and they attacked him, my ears, I'm like, whoa. So not only is he this billionaire businessman with a television show, would he have stooped to the level? Then I'm trying to really realize what the Democrats are saying. I'm like, wait a minute. Are they saying I went into the ballot box and I pulled Hillary and Donald got the vote? Or did something seep into my mind because some great mind thing happened, and by osmosis I'd have voted Hillary, which I would never, I was like, what do they mean by the Russians influenced the election? I'm trying to figure out what all this means. And then of course some of it was like bad press against Hillary. And now you fast forward 8+ years from, and when you see the players who clearly lied through that last administration leading to Trump, to me, this is mind-boggling, the depth and breadth of what actually happened, and I don't see anything coming from it. Do you think there'll be any prosecutions? Right. And so basically, you're going to see a past administration play games behind the scenes in attacking a candidate and then a president and undermining and all the rest, and they're going to basically, and then do you think part of that is the Republicans recognize if they fight this battle, they're going to get more of it next time?
In my world, there are no Republicans and there are no Democrats.
Okay.
There are people who can be bought, rented, bribed, threatened, and paid for, who wear two different hats. Some wear a red hat, some wear a blue hat. The corruption has been endemic. Going back to Franklin Roosevelt, there has not been a president of the United States since Truman who wasn't provably connected to organized crime at one level or another. Once you understand that and you really step back far enough to what are we really dealing with here? It's just a big, ugly ball of corruption in the center of the District of Columbia. It's been out of control for over 100 years, 150 years. It is what it is. I'm not being a bad guy. I'm not being negative. I'm the guy from the future, okay? That's all I'm trying to say. And so I just shift my perspective. I don't get involved in it anymore. I stay up on current affairs because I can see what these clowns are going to do next. But I taught my kids, these people who are running the show, they're not any smarter than the rest of us. They've got quadrillions of dollars at their disposal. They've got their fingers into all the NGOs, all the governments, all the big corporations, and they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, if I were in their position, looking at the world through their eyes, I know exactly what I would do. And then when you see it that way, and you start making predictions and they all come true, it doesn't make you a genius. It's just that, well, that's what I would do. If I were a megalomaniac psychopath,
right,
that wanted all the power to run the whole world like my personal version of Monopoly, I know what I would do. And they'd go right ahead and do it. And it doesn't surprise me in the least. And I'm not saying that because I'm a smart guy. It just doesn't surprise me. It's just common sense. So when you take that perspective, you then get humble enough to say, okay, I'm out. What can I do? I'm just repeating myself, to empower myself and the people I love and care about to get through what I think is going to be an incredibly turbulent time. But the good news is we can come out the other end and maybe even thrive and profit from some of the volatility that's coming.
Right.
And that's why I started an online school. I'm teaching my students the principles of contrarian investing and all this kind of stuff. But maybe we can get into that some other time.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we could do a show on that. So, sir, this has been a great show. I really appreciate you being on.
No, I appreciate you, brother. You're right in there.
All right. So anything you want to say about, plug your book, ways that people can reach you?
Yeah, well, my son is our family IT wizard. So he went and bought the domain, theriskyreader.com. You type it into your browser, it takes you right to Amazon, right where the book is.
Very good.
If people want to get it, they're welcome to.
Well, God bless you.
Yeah, you too.
Appreciate having you on.
You too, Jack.
And this has been More to Consider. Again, please like, subscribe to our show. You'll see more of it. Hope you like this type of information. Good discussions, history, politics, etc. Thank you so much. God bless, sir. Bye-bye.
Amen.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe and hit your notification button to get an update when we post another episode. See you soon.